we're going to move on to the implementation phase and start with Josh Betz and his presentation partner, Lindsay. Josh, tell us about the implementation phase and introduce yourself.
Sure. Can you see my slides?
Not yet, but we should soon. I stopped sharing. There we go. We can see
All
it.
right. So now we're going to have the rubber meet the proverbial road, and we're going to talk about implementation, about how to collect and manage this data and use it to inform trial operations. My colleague, Lindsay Eyzaguirre, is going to be talking about the management and operation perspectives in this area as well. So if you walk away with nothing else from this talk, I want you to remember that reporting guidelines are not just for when you're writing that final manuscript. These actually are extremely useful because they provide us an entire roadmap from what data do we need to report back to what data do we need to collect in order to report this data. And this also gives us key metrics to monitor the accruing data to ensure that we've got study integrity from the very first enrollment to the last participants. Let's follow up. And I want to make the analogy that these study documents, your protocol, your data management plan, and your study database or the electronic data capture, EDC, is this hull of a ship that we're setting out to sea when we launch a study. And if we launch that ship without an intact hull, we're going to spend an awful lot of effort to stay afloat. We're going to lose momentum, and there's only so much that you can do once you've set the ship out to sea. It requires an awful lot of effort to repair things that may be very disruptive, and still there may be ultimate damage to the integrity of the trial if you start too early. And also the third key point is that monitoring is key to ensuring a trial stays on course. There's only so many things that we can actually anticipate during a course of a trial. So it's key to have your data monitoring set up so you can easily identify issues as they arise and mitigate potential threats to the integrity. So I want to frame, like people have said, is beginning with the end in mind based on the consort standards for reporting trials. And these are essentially the de facto standard in reporting trials because they provide a nice, concise overview of the conduct of a trial, both with the eye on the safety of the participants in the study, but also the validity of the scientific comparison between our treatment groups. And these are exactly the same concerns that our Data and Safety Monitoring Board are keeping an eye on during the conduct of a trial. So this is also a useful tool in thinking through our data and safety monitoring plan. So the top of this consort diagram reflects factors relating to our external validity that we were just talking about. Based on our inclusion and exclusion criteria and screening process, who are the individuals that we can actually infer about given the sample that we're collecting in that enrollment process? And the bottom of that diagram reflects factors impacting internal validity, factors that impact the comparison between our two treatment groups. And these are things like the delivery of the intervention, the fidelity of intervention delivery, adherence, tolerance, and then also intercurrent events that affect, outcome completeness that we've been mentioning, missed visits, missed assessments, and so forth. And we already talked about the role of randomization to protect against selection bias. When we compare those two treatment groups, we want to make sure that the difference we see is actually reflective of the treatment itself, not due to underlying differences between the two groups being compared that were given those treatments. Right? And so randomization is going to tend to produce those comparable treatment groups at baseline, but then reality happens. All these intercurrent events that we've been mentioning occur once a participant could be randomized. They may have a sudden status change that changes the risk-benefit ratio of the interventions under study. They may be unable to tolerate the treatment or may not be able or willing to adhere to the intervention. They may ultimately discontinue the intervention. They may start off other interventions, either an off-study treatment or perhaps a rescue medication as part of a study. People don't always get the treatment they've been assigned to, or if a treatment is available outside of the study, some individuals may seek it out. And then there's other events that we talked about, the issue of censoring events or incomplete assessments or missed visits or participants dropping out. And the importance of documenting all these things is we're spending so much effort to use randomization to protect against these selection bias. But all these things, if we're not careful, can potentially let selection bias creep back in. And one thing that's also important to remember is that we only have control over treatment assignment. We don't have control over, whether a participant is able to tolerate the intervention, whether they're able to adhere to it, and so forth. And so the question comes up usually from multiple parties, from investigators, from study coordinators, even the participants themselves. Why should somebody continue in the study if they're not adhering to the intervention? And it's key that we provide people an answer to this question that's understandable, because that's going to give them the motivation to stay in the study. The reason that we want them in the studies, the goal is to understand the experience of all participants, even if they're not able to tolerate the intervention, even if they're not able to adhere to the intervention. And we need to communicate this in an understandable way. For example, the issues of online shopping and reviews of products. Let's say if you were shopping for a product and you knew that everybody who had a bad experience had their reviews removed. People who stopped using that product had their reviews removed. Or people who bought another product instead. Would you trust that information? And conveying this in an understandable way, both from investigators, study coordinators, and eventually to participants, is key to retaining people in the study. We also want to make sure that investigators aren't inadvertently also putting a thumb on the scale by withdrawing participants unnecessarily. The focus of investigators is putting their energy into identifying who are the right people, enrolling them, randomizing them, and encouraging adherence and retention whenever possible. The goal should be whenever it's safe for a participant to continue and they're willing to do that, they should continue with data collection. If somebody initiates some sort of off-study treatment, it's important to document that, again, so that we can inform that consort diagram. If it's safe to combine an off-study and on-study medication or treatment, then by all means, continue on intervention, monitor the participants closely, and continue collecting our follow-up data. But if there's questions about whether it's safe to combine these things, we should usually err on the side of safety, discontinue treatment, but still collecting that follow-up data. And again, it's key to remember that adherence to the study intervention isn't necessarily a reason to withdraw from a study. And when participants understand that even if they're not on the study intervention, their data still has value, generally they're more willing to stay in the study and we can get better quality data and evidence. It's important to understand that we also need a clear mapping from all the data we're collecting to what we ultimately need to report at the end of the day. Making sure that our database or EDC is collecting all relevant pre-screening data, that we understand how the data we collect is going to fill in each of those data elements in the top part of the consort diagram. We need to make sure that our EDC handles our appropriate randomization strategy, whether that's stratified randomization, minimization, or something else. And that our randomization strategy is congenial and aligned with our analysis strategy at the end of the trial. We also want to make sure that we're using a validated implementation method to carry out randomization. Because again, you can't have a randomized controlled trial without a valid randomization strategy. And we also want to make sure that this is implemented in a way that avoids problems like ineligible participants being randomized or people being randomized before their full eligibility has been assessed. And whenever those intercurrent events occur, which they invariably do, we want to make sure that the EDC is capable of documenting them, particularly when the reason these events occur are related to the treatments under study or the outcome of interest. It's also important that everybody on the study team knows that the EDC is the record of study, is the ground truth, and that all of the information is being fed into the EDC, and all of our data-driven decisions are governed by data coming out of the EDC. And before we launch that study, we need both the different perspectives of both the data managers and the statisticians reviewing this EDC before we start collecting data. It's also important that our EDC is fit for purpose regarding our study requirements, including requirements about audit trails, and if things are going to be used in submissions to the FDA, there's special standards that also needed to be adhered to. And this may also change with your data sharing requirements and plans. We also need to make sure that our EDC is actually documenting the participants' consent and also what they've consented should be shared at the end of the trial, so that we know what data can be shared in compliance with the participants' wishes. We need to make sure that whatever instruments we're using have been validated for the population under study, and that we have the appropriate licenses and permissions to use those things. And that whenever we're collecting data, we're using common data elements, which allows and facilitates comparisons across different study samples. We need to make sure our EDC is masking information appropriate to the role of the user, whether that's identifying information such as PII, or whether that's treatment or outcome information that may need to be masked from certain study roles. We need to make sure that all of our case report forms have been correctly implemented and correctly documented, and that all of the prompts and responses have been correctly entered, and that whenever we're doing any calculations in the EDC, these have been tested and validated before this study is launched to make sure they're working as intended. We can use skip logic so that items or questions are only presented when they're relevant. This can avoid collection of irrelevant data or nonsensical data. And part of the EDC's role is in facilitating study operations, including notifying individuals when certain events occur. So we want to make sure that when notifications are triggered appropriately when certain events occur, and that those notifications only contain appropriate information for the recipient's study role. For example, if there's an emergency case in which a participant's treatment information needs to be unmasked, that only the individuals who should have that information receive those notifications. And we want to make sure that the data we collect easily allow us to identify the participants' disposition, both overall in the study, as well as what happened at each visit, again, so we can construct that study flow diagram and monitor the data as it's collected, know what data we should be expecting for a given participant. The EDC is also key to clear and consistent data collection from the very start of the study. For example, there's range checks and type checks to make sure that only the appropriate data is being entered where it should be. And these can trigger warnings that warn people that the data, aren't consistent with what should be entered, or actually prevent people from proceeding until that error has been corrected. We can also mark fields as required so that this can avoid accidentally skipping items or pages that you would have in a paper case report form. And whenever we have missing data from, either a missed assessment or a partially complete assessment, it's important we have fields in the EDC that allow us to document why these things are missing. And importantly, are these things that are unrelated to the participant status? For example, the MRI scanner being down doesn't depend on your cognitive status, or a sample being lost in shipping doesn't really, relate to a characteristics of an individual. But if somebody is unable to perform, an exercise task, or somebody becomes distraught during cognitive testing because of their performance and needs to stop, these are things that are actually indicative of the person's underlying status and need to be recorded for relevance. We also want to make sure that we're avoiding free text responses whenever possible, unless we're only collecting qualitative data or documenting things. We can all see, those things all represent the same thing, but computers are going to treat each one of those responses differently. And we also want to keep an eye on when people can enter a response other than a pre-selected response. Keep an eye on those responses so that we can aggregate those and standardize those responses for more consistent data collection. We also want to make sure that after we spend all that data, all that effort getting data into the EDC, we can also get that data out in consistent formats, and that it's ready for statisticians and data managers to work with. And this is important because this reduces the frequency of data issues, the effort it takes to resolve those issues, the timeliness of reporting when you don't have to worry about those data issues as much, and ultimately increases data quality at the end of the study. And we can also use our data we're collecting to inform trial operations. For example, collecting data on data quality issues. Simply collecting things on spreadsheets isn't enough because, again, if we're going to make this data operationally available, it needs to be collected in a clear and consistent way. That's why one solution to this is actually doing a separate database for data quality control, identifying, what are the data issues we're seeing, what fields are affected, how do these things get resolved, and then the current status of each of those issues. This allows us to track the frequency of data quality issues, the duration until they're resolved, and ultimately their outcomes. And based on this, we can determine, is this an issue that's just site-specific or individual-specific? Is this something more general, perhaps that there needs to be training or modifications to the electronic data capture? Is this something that is a one-time event, or is this time limited, or is this still an issue that's ongoing? Having data to drive these decisions is extremely important. And this allows us to better coordinate between statisticians, data management, site management, and data monitors, avoid redundant efforts, and identify and resolve these issues more quickly. So how this process works is data is exported from the EDC. The data management team produces data queries. These are passed to the EDC, site enters data, and then this actually can be fed back into the data management workflow. But our responsibility doesn't just end at the checking the EDC at the start. We need to keep an eye on it to see if there's new variables or data in the export that, are they expected? Are they not expected? Or do we see data or variables that are missing? Or do we see changes to data types, changes to the responses coming out of the EDC? And if we see these unexpected changes, these are things that need to be, promptly addressed with the study team and EDC vendor. And then whenever we have the EDC, that kind of sets some guardrails and some quality checks and our audit trails. But if we have data that's being processed outside the EDC, labs, imaging, omics, wearables, so on and so forth, not everything can be processed in the EDC. And it's important to have a plan for how this stuff is handled to avoid accidental unmasking of treatment or outcome information. And we need to make sure that we're testing this process prior to study launch to ensure smooth sailing. All of this data, if it's being fed into the EDC, needs to be run to a QC workflow beforehand to make sure that these are meeting our data quality standards. And also, we need to know where things are from when a sample is collected to when it's finally processed, where things are in that pipeline. And then there's metadata that are crucial to identifying and linking between, the source data collected and the ultimate measurements we collect, such as a file fingerprint or file hash that can link, for example, an MRI image upload to an MRI image processing workflow. So, like I said before, we're setting a ship out to sea, and having everything in place is important to the integrity of our study. We're spending a lot of time and resources getting this ship out to sea, but if we launch too soon, we could be heading into some rough waters. And once we're out at sea, what we can do is far more limited, as far more disruptive, and far more costly, and can result in damage to trial integrity. And there's also a significant effort and cost to maintain operations while these things are fixed. So make sure that you're beginning with the end in mind, with your study requirements, consort criteria. Stress test your EDC and your processes before you ever set out to recruit your first participant. Make sure that you've got appropriate quality assurance baked into your EDC, and that you've also got your quality checks in place from the very first participant. Information is appropriately restricted to study roles, and everything has been tested for usability, both in terms of data entry and also getting data out. And also, we need to document this process, not only from the outset, but also, when changes are happen, what's changed, when, and how. And as soon as we have these specifications, your data managers and statisticians can actually get going on your data work. So,
Terrific. Thank you. And you even answered one of the questions in the chat with your last slide. But we can talk more about it later. Why don't you introduce Lindsay, and let's go on to your partner's talk.
So Lindsay Eyzaguirre is going to be talking about the operations perspective, integrating trial operations to strengthen data reproducibility in clinical trials.
Thank you so much. So as Josh mentioned today, I'm going to be discussing about techniques for aligning with trial operations and with data integrity, emphasizing on the importance of cross-functional collaboration, proactive planning, and constant process improvement. Can I have the next slide, please? So let's start with cross-functional collaboration between the principal investigators, the statisticians, and the project managers. These individuals have to work together to make sure that the protocol is not only scientifically sound, but also operationally feasible. When these teams work together and make decisions together, operational choices can strengthen the data quality rather than compromising it, leading to consistent data capture and, more importantly, meaningful and reproductive results. A common challenge that we see in clinical trials is that statisticians are brought in too late, and most of the time they're not fully engaged throughout the trial. So let's go over a little bit about why engaging them early and keeping them involved throughout the phases of the trial is important. Next slide, please. So here's some examples. I'm going to start with the circle all the way in the top figure. The statisticians provide critical input in the protocol development, ensuring that the plan analyses are feasible. They are also responsible for developing the statistical analysis plan and then aligning it with the protocol. So that means they must be engaged anytime the protocol is modified. So remember, when you're planning for protocol modifications as you're finding or fine-tuning your protocol. Statisticians also should be involved during the development and the revisions of trial-specific documents, such as data and safety monitoring plan, the data management plan, and the monitoring plan. Sometimes we're working in silos. So here's just a few, but bring in your statisticians, give them the opportunity to review with you. Statisticians should also collaborate in with the data management team to design the case report forms. You heard from Josh, it's very important. He's very knowledgeable in telling you the ins and outs of the data, but if you don't bring in your statistician, even your EDC structure is not going to be adequate. So they should be helping you set the clear data quality standards. Again, this means engaging the statisticians anytime changes are made to the CRFs in the EDC. As the trial progresses, a statistician should monitor adherence to the intention to treat principle, identifying trends and guiding all of you in the study team making timely corrective actions. As you can see, keeping the statisticians engaged throughout the trial not only protects scientifically validity, but also operational integrity of the trial. But at the same time, it allows statisticians such as like Josh and Cayenne to actually do their core job, which is data analysis at the end. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, the statisticians play a critical role in developing the CRFs and the EDC. And you also heard from Josh that building a clear and consistent EDC is critical, but that's just the first step. If the study teams and the site teams are not properly trained on how to use the EDC and enter data, the trial data will not be complete. That's why EDC training should be done. It should not be a one-time event at startup. It needs to be revisited whenever updates are made or when issues are identified. So the training should emphasize on consistent screening and documentations across sites, complete entry and randomization, adherence and follow-up data, clear and standardized event definitions, accurate recording of missed visits or discontinuations. And just as important is timely data entry and query resolution. Once teams are well trained, the real value of the EDC comes from using it throughout the life of the trial. By working closely with your statisticians and reviewing the data as it's being collected, study teams can monitor the trial conduct in real time, and you can identify potential issues early, long before they impact data integrity. Next slide, please. So as Cayenne, Nicole, and Josh mentioned, we should always keep the end in mind. The concert diagram tells a trial story of who was screened, who was enrolled, randomized, and followed. To make sure that the story is complete, start by planning for the trial population to be accurate, develop standardized eligibility checklists, and provide training to ensure consistent interpretation of the eligibility criteria across your sites. What you think eligibility should be, it may not be the same thing. It might not be how another site interprets that eligibility. So make sure it is consistent. Validate the eligibility and the informed consent workflows across sites, and then confirm randomization readiness before enrolling your first participant, but not at one site. Do it across your sites. This means ensuring that site staff are fully trained, local workflows have been tested, and the EDC access and user permissions have properly been configured. I would hate for any of you to miss an enrollment just because something was not working properly. It can also be helpful to conduct a mock randomization. That will help you refine your full process. Next slide, please. Now let's talk about monitoring for completeness, which also supports the diagram. As I mentioned, using the EDC, not just for data entry, but as a real-time monitoring tool is critical. The full study team should monitor enrollment data to confirm participants are the intended population. Statisticians and data managers should develop reports to track randomizations, intervention adherence, and follow-up. I recommend that the full team also review screen failures carefully. They can often highlight protocol changes or clarifications that may be needed. And finally, the full team should also review protocol deviations routinely, especially statisticians, as they can help you identify the root causes. Often reoccurring deviations point to bigger issues such as unclear language or inconsistent training. So together, these practices ensures that the trial data in the consort diagram is accurate and complete. Next slide, please. So one of the biggest challenges that we continue to see in clinical research is that trials often fall behind schedule or fail to meet enrollment goals. For example, a review of 2,542 randomized clinical trials found that only about 20% finished on time, with a median delay of more than 1 year. Less than half reached enrollment targets. To address this persistent issue, we incorporate gaming into our trial operations. We use site tasks, trial metrics, and performance indicators to design friendly competitions between sites. We apply this approach throughout the life of the life cycle, using games to accelerate startup, to boost screening and enrollment numbers, to improve visit completion rates, and even to strengthen data entry and query resolution. The result has been greater motivation among site teams and more time to achieve our milestones. Next slide, please. Now that I have talked about ensuring data accuracy and completeness before and during enrollment, I want to shift to what happens after randomization and how to take the intention to treat principle that Josh mentioned and put it into action. After randomization, it's essential for study teams and site teams to understand that every participant has value, regardless of adherence, whether the participant misses visits, discontinues the intervention, or even withdraws from treatment. Their data still contributes to the understanding of the trial outcomes. To support sites, provide them with practical retention resources such as frequently asked questions, short information videos, or even talking points or scripts to help site staff to explain to participants why their continued participation matters. Finally, make it a routine practice to reassess how the intention to treat principles are being implemented. This ensures that the participants remain in the analysis population and that the trial conclusions truly reflect the real world conditions. Next slide, please. So once randomization is underway and participants are actively being followed, maintaining oversight becomes critical. This is where consistent documentation and communication and early intervention makes all the difference. So start by standardizing how the protocol deviations are documented and reported. This ensures that the deviations are handled consistently across all sites and that any patterns are recognized quickly. Regular site trainings are also key. Again, not just at startup, but throughout the trial. So teams know exactly when and how to escalate issues. Finally, hold weekly site calls to identify and address retention risks early. These conversations often pinpoint small issues before they become bigger problems. Next slide, please. So even with strong oversight, every trial will face with challenges that lead to missing or incomplete data. What really matters is understanding why it happens so you can prevent it. Some root causes are participant related, like withdrawals or dropouts or loss to follow. Others are operational, such as missed visits or data entry, or even technical problems with the EDC. So to prevent missing data, start by designing clear and realistic protocols. I can't stress it enough. Sometimes we complicate protocols, and that just has a downside effect. It just escalates. And then simplifying your CRFs so that sites can easily enter data and think about the flow. Work with your statisticians again, because the CRF should be intuitive. It shouldn't be something that sites are trying to figure out where to find things. So plan ahead to keep participants engaged through regular reminders and follow-ups, and make sure that to set expectations for data entry and query resolution. Also think about ways or tactics to motivate your site teams. Finally, monitor continuously, develop missing data reports, focus on the primary endpoints in site level reports to identify trends, and make missing data a standard topic in your operations meetings so that it's front and center and you're reviewing it as things are happening. The earlier the issues are caught, the easier they are to be able to fix them. So for me, the easier or the earlier you find the problems, the faster you're going to fix them, and your data is going to be more reliable. Can we go to the next slide, please? So I want to leave you with these takeaways. Data integrity and trial operation success depends on active communication, proactive planning, share accountability across teams. Study PIs and project managers ensure operational consistency, and they keep the trial moving forward, while the statisticians ensure analytical validity. These roles have to work together because they depend on each other. Thank you. Can we go to the next slide, please? I think that was my last slide. Yes, these are just
Right.
references that I use for my talk. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions along with Josh.
And you won a prize because you finished on time and on budget, which is one of Lindsay's many monikers. Just give us a short 15-second introduction about your many years of background.
Absolutely. And I skipped that because I was trying to make sure that we didn't run out of time. My background is in epidemiology. My experience is in translation science and leading and managing multi-center trials. I don't want to age myself, but I want to say more than 20 years I've been doing this. And I started my career in HIV research, molecular epidemiology, and moved into clinical trials.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Yeah.
Okay, this was a great section. We've had several questions that have been answered in the chat, but they may need to be further investigated. Keisha Hope wrote us, just wanted to emphasize how important user acceptance testing is. Please take this step seriously. It saves time and money moving forward. I don't know whether either you or Josh want to comment on that.
Josh, do you want to give it? I'll give, please go ahead.
Sure. I will say that user acceptability is not just the coordinators, it's everybody who is using the EDC. If it's not functional for everybody, this is going to cause problems down the road. And so I could not agree more with user acceptance testing before you, again, set that ship out to sea.
Yeah,
If it's not functional for even one of the partners, it's not functional for the trial and everybody, right?
absolutely.
Yeah, there's compromises involved, but everybody needs to be happy at the end of the day.
Yeah. And what I can add to Josh is that if you have individuals that can test it before it goes live, not only at your site, but if you have a friendly site that can test it, because different perspectives is just going to make a whole lot of difference. It can also be a cost, right? So if you launch your EDC and you're already using it and you identify issues later on, this is going to add unplanned, significant budgetary issues. If you want to add a new CRF, it also, we have a lot of issues with, how is the data going to look like after you add a new CRF logic and all of that. It just complicates things. If you start off right at the very beginning, even if you think that is going to delay your plans a little bit, I think it's worth it to not launch it and to spend that extra time and be delay in launching it rather than rushing through that process. And I think rushing is a consistent thing that I see in protocol development. People are trying to rush the protocol development, and that's when we find issues, and that's why sometimes we don't get the right people to review things. And we find that we have to do multiple protocol, changes, which as you heard, has all of these impacts, not only about the people, but now it impacts the EDC and others. So,
Okay, thanks.
mhm.
Both of you have a couple more questions here, and I know at least one of them gets our moderator, Chris Lindsay, very excited, but we'll do the simple one first. Eligibility with inclusion and exclusion criteria. Any standardized examples to share, Josh and Lindsay?
Um, the only thing that I can say is the more specific you can be in your inclusion and exclusion criteria, even including ranges, is going to make it easier for somebody to interpret. Because inclusion and exclusion criteria are very disease and trial specific, it's hard to think about a standardized way. My advice is specific, make it very clear. If you're looking for a diagnosis, say diagnosis confirmed by X, Y, and Z. You're looking for a value, say within this range.
Okay, so clarity.
Yes.
Josh,
I would
you're
say
nodding.
also view the EDC as an option to reinforce training. So people shouldn't have to open their MOP to remind themselves what these things mean. And so the more you have that's friendly to the coordinator and helps them remember their training, the more consistently people are going to enter data and do the right thing. So when you're designing your EDC, it's not just like when people push the buttons, do the right values come out, but also making it functional from an educational and training perspective of, like Lindsay said, giving the information and examples and responses that they may have to give participants or things like that.
Great. So Irina Radu, if I'm saying it correctly, asked the question, how do you see the future of research in terms of the use of AI for trial operations? And we have a second question, which perhaps bumps into that, from an anonymous attendee. Is double data entry recommended?
I think the AI question could be a very long discussion. So maybe that would be a good one to save towards the end. But I will, at least for now, say we should be very careful.
Okay.
Leave it, leave the discussion for perhaps later.
And double data entry?
Double data entry, that comes with costs and benefits, and I think that that's also going to be discussed later on in the coming presentations from Guyana and Andrew.
Okay. Chris, do you want to touch the third rail of AI and the future of clinical trials?
Absolutely. This is a fascinating time because I think we now know enough about the emerging technology that we can begin to see what the true promise is and what the joke is. There's a lot of things out there that are not going to come to fruition, but a lot of what people imagined will actually come true. We will have an environment where a lot of the generation of documents, a lot of the transfer of information from point A to point B becomes a little bit roboticized. I mean, let's be honest, when we write a trial protocol, we often start with one that we had before and, move on from it. It's not that different from the way things are going. I agree we have to be very careful, and human beings are accountable for their actions. And at this point in time, the AI is not actually able to take the physical action we might expect. So we have to be in the way. But I do think that AI is coming. In the interim, I would just say I'm hearing it an awful lot, and I just want to reiterate it. We as clinical researchers, we have a certain amount of know-how, a certain amount of experience, and a certain amount of data. AI does not have any of that at this point in time. And so while AI is coming to help us, it will only help us, and our jobs won't be taken by AI. Our jobs might be taken by people who've learned how to use AI effectively.
Right. I think that's a thoughtful spin on what's likely to happen. Do you want to make any comments. You spoke to this issue at the recent CTSA meeting as well. Do you want to make any comments about the different uses of AI? And I think I had to look up this word, agentic AI versus um, uh, a more open system.
Yeah, so this concept of agentic AI is becoming more and more available to us in the general public. But really, if we think about what either generative AI or predictive AI is doing, it's really making some kind of a measurement to create information, or it is generating text or an image or something that is new information. And so it's an information creator or generator. And in clinical research, we need to generate that piece of information, whether it's a manual of procedures or an IRB protocol or a variable specification list. We need to create that information, and then we move that information to the next step in the research journey. And so, the research team might write a manual of procedures, and then that goes out to the sites who provide feedback. So when that step of information transfer occurs, that's an action. And so if we think about AI in this frame of information provision and then action, it's really how we all operate. We generate some information and then we decide what to do with it. And then we generate the next piece of information based upon what we just did. And it becomes a journey. If we think about what software is, it is nothing more than a series of instructions. Agentic AI is the same thing. It's a series of instructions. Generate the information. Here's some instructions on how to act based upon that. And then here's another instruction based upon how to act, as the agent builds upon itself. So it's information provision and action, and it's no more than simple software loops.
Great.
If I could say one thing, Dan, I will
Please.
say that my greatest fear about AI in randomized trials is that people will use it in the proposal phase and not consult somebody who knows better. And that could lead to disasters down the road. So I would say don't use ChatGPT as a substitute for a statistician. That is not going to get anyone where they need to go.
And I think both Guyan and Elizabeth made the point that doing your homework on data sources and checking the external validity of your premises is really important here. Guyan, you have a question. We have time for two more
I was
questions.
going to ask if there is time. So there is a question to me about how AI influences statistics, and I think maybe being a little more, again, cautious. So partly what Josh was saying is kind of avoiding relying too much on sources like that in terms of kind of your final word or replacing a statistician or statistical thinking. I was wondering if there is, and maybe it's back to Chris, if there is any type of developments in terms of using AI for identifying eligible patients at any point, at a sort of site level, database level, kind of those EHR level, if you're familiar with any of those, because again, it's an interesting area.
Yeah, so there's an awful lot of AI that is being deployed, and there are many companies that are coming out that say, we can find you patients because we can now review the EHR or a public data source or a private data source. Unfortunately, many of those groups, they may have founded a data source, but they don't actually have access to health systems or know-how of how to integrate the decision making into clinical pathways to effect true recruitment. But to answer the specific question about how AI is going to impact statistical research, so currently there are now software packages and a number of other things where you can plug in a protocol and it will generate the statistical analysis plan. There are others where you can plug in the statistical analysis plan and it will execute a query on data, whether it's a trial data or EHR data, and it will then actually run the analysis and give you back a clinical study report with the results. And it's all done by this agentic AI with kind of various steps in the process. None of that is going to replace the complex thinking that we've been discussing here. The no AI is able to really understand the complexity of challenges that come up in study design. It is the edge cases. It is the what ifs that we are all thinking about to preserve the integrity of the study. The AI is not thinking about the what ifs. It's pretty generic.
Mhm.
Okay. Great. And Yongjin Choi from University of Washington asked about EDC quality control examples, and I think we'll try to look for one, Yongjin, to provide you. Thank you for your question.